If you play enough video games, or you were alive when it was a meme in 2018, chances are you've seen this pose. It's the T-pose, and at one point in history, it was funny looking enough to end up as a Fortnite emote. 2018 was truly a simpler time. But despite how silly it looks, it's actually crucial to 3D animation, since it's usually the default pose characters are sculpted in. And the T-pose isn't the only pose of its kind. There's also the A pose, lots of different poses for non-humanoids, and whatever this frog is doing. But why model something this way? Shouldn't characters be modeled in a more natural, relaxed pose? And what's the difference between each pose? Why model a character in an A pose over a T pose? Most 3D modeling programs and game engines will call this a bind pose, or a reference pose. Technically, a bind pose can be anything you want it to be, because every 3D character is made of two things, a skeleton and a model. And the bind pose is created when the model is bound to the skeleton. So the bind pose is just the skeleton without any movement or animation applied. It makes a bit more sense if you think like a computer. Each bone in a skeleton keeps track of its rotations as 3 numbers, X, Y, and Z. If you rotate the arm on the Z axis, then Z increases to 45 degrees. So the bind pose is when all of those numbers for every bone in the skeleton are at 0. So, if the bind pose can be anything, why this pose? If you've seen my video on 3D rigging, you may already know why, but to put it simply, it has a lot to do with this area, the armpit and the shoulders. When it comes to binding the model to the skeleton, armpits and shoulders are a huge pain. They're one of the only parts of the body that have a near full 360-degree rotation, so it's difficult to have them bend and twist and look good at every angle. If you've watched any behind the scenes of Pixar films, you'll actually see them test how the arms and shoulders bend at all angles, since it's such an important area to get right. Modeling characters in a T-pose gives you the best access to the shoulders and armpits while skinning the model to the skeleton. And in animation, the balance between both armpits and shoulders prevents stretching when the arms are at extreme angles, like when they're raised all the way up. If a character is modeled in an A pose and they raise their arms, it can pull the armpit area with it, while at the same time potentially losing volume in the shoulder. But then, why model an A pose at all? I modeled Doodly in T pose, while Gimberly is modeled in A pose, so why choose one over the other? The thing with T-poses is that it's not a very natural pose to have by default. Characters that are often holding a gun, for example, benefit from having a more natural A pose. In realistic first-person shooters especially, you'll even see characters modeled with their arms bent and forward, so the reference pose is as natural as possible. It actually kind of looks like they're hugging. A hug pose. In contrast, characters with cartoony proportions need to be modeled more straight, so a T-pose can work best. Nintendo seems to almost exclusively model characters in T-pose, for example. With cartoony rubber hose-like arms and legs, it would be a bad idea to model them with a bend, since you can never straighten them out completely. The bend in their models will always be built in, so to speak, so any attempt at bending backwards or straightening out completely will always have weird-looking kinks where the arms bend. Something that doesn't matter as much for realistic, more detailed characters. So, my general rule is, for realistic proportions, you want an A pose, but for cartoony proportions, you want a T pose. But honestly, the difference is minor for the vast majority of characters. There's plenty of cartoony games with A poses, realistic games with T poses, and some games have both T pose and A pose characters in them to best match what's needed for each character. Since bind poses can be anything, it's really a matter of what works best with a character. In fact, there's plenty of poses that go beyond T poses and A poses for characters that aren't humanoid or have weird details to their animation. I actually did a ton of research on all the different kinds of poses you can find in game development, and organized them in various categories using today's sponsor, Milano, who were gracious enough to sponsor another one of my videos. Milano is a tool for organizing your creative projects, and as you can imagine, I tend to have a lot of those. Recently, I've been using Milano to collect the changes I want to make to the Doodly and Gimberly rigs. Rather than writing them down in a text document, I can take screenshots of the areas I want to fix, add notes and ideas, and draw out the features I plan to add. It's a lot more visual this way, which works great for me as a visual person. Earlier in July, I also needed to create a mood board for an artist I'm commissioning a t-shirt design from, so I used Milano to organize everything, as well as their web clipper tool. This way, I could clip any 3D references I wanted for the design directly to the board without copy and pasting, as well as stuff from Doodly, notes and suggestions I had, and specifications for the shirt design, all in one document. After it's done, she can view the mood board and even be added as a collaborator to edit it herself in real time. For this video, I organized all the reference poses I could find into various categories, and it really helped comparing certain poses side by side, like the 2 variations on A poses I showed earlier. Plus, I can keep track of what games these weird poses come from, and write down my thoughts on why they're posed that way for later in the video. And even if you're not sure where to start with organizing your boards, Milanote offers over 100 built-in templates you can edit and modify for any creative project you want. As always, Milanote is available for free with no time limit. Sign up using the link in the description and start your next creative project. Also, I'd love to hear what you're using it for. Last time, a lot of people left super nice comments about how they already use Milanote, or that it seems really useful and they had plans to use it, including some ideas for boards I really want to do myself. So let me know what you have planned in the comments below. Thanks again to Milanote for sponsoring this video, and let's get back into it. So, with the regular old T poses and A poses out of the way, let's talk about the weirdos. Earlier I mentioned that it's a bad idea to model a bend in anything that may need to straighten out completely. And this is especially true for snake-like characters. It's actually necessary to model them completely straight, creating an extremely funny looking T pose that turns a snake into a stick. This can also include long necks, like Piranha Plant here, or snake-like limbs. Dark Sun Gwendolyn from Dark Souls, for example, normally has snakes curled at his feet, but by necessity they're all modeled completely straight, and therefore really long in his A pose. This also extends to tentacles and octopi, in case you were wondering. On the opposite end of things though, it can sometimes be useful to model characters with a bend on purpose. Zenyatta from Overwatch, for example, is always floating with his legs crossed, so he's sculpted with his legs bent. Just like the slightly bent arms we saw earlier on realistic characters, it helps a lot to sculpt the bend in his legs by default if that's how his legs are going to be most of the time. Plus, for reasons that are impossible to explain succinctly in this video, the further away a limb bends and rotates away from the bind pose, it can actually lose volume. So it makes sense that a character with his legs bent all the time wouldn't be modeled with his legs straight. Perhaps the best example of this though is Godric the Grafted from Elden Ring. Tons of extra limbs that barely bend, an asymmetrical character design, and a hunched over posture gives us probably the weirdest position you could ever call a T-pose. Yes, this is actually his T-pose. And it's really not far from his idle animation, which to me shows a lot of trust and synchronization between the artists at FromSoft to best capture this character's personality and detail. For characters that aren't bipedal, such as animals, usually they can be modeled with their legs on the ground just fine. But this can get a little weird for characters that have animalistic features like digitigrade legs, but stand up straight. So you get whatever this pose Salazzle from Pokemon is in, or this one of Kurama from Naruto. T-pose in the front, party in the back. But my favorite of all of these is this frog from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Phantom Blood on the PS2. Now, if I were to model a frog in T-pose, modeling their legs pointing straight out does make sense. But I choose to believe this frog was specifically modeled this way because in the manga this game is adapted from, it gets punched and flattens out. Now, I have no proof that this was the motivation behind modeling the frog this way, but I choose to believe the artist was given this task of modeling this frog and said, "Oh, this is the frog that gets punched. I'd better model it flat." All of this is to say, the important part of modeling characters isn't the T-pose or A-pose or whatever it might be. It's to understand what's needed for the best possible rigging and animation. 99% of the time, the T-pose, A-pose, or hug pose are the most efficient, and the difference between them is really minor. But every character is different, and many characters have quirks and features that might fall out of the usual poses. If something on the character needs to curve or bend backwards in animation, model it straight. If something looks more natural bent and never really needs to straighten out, model it bent. Your preference for T-pose could be as simple as wanting the arms to be aligned with the x-axis, and I'd be inclined to agree. Honestly, the best thing you can do as an artist is to try rigging and animating yourself to know what works best when modeling or sculpting. Understanding the specifics a model needs for rigging and animation will always make the entire process easier on you or your team. At the end of the day though, we can all appreciate just how funny T-poses look, and I just wanted to ramble about them for a few minutes. So I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching.